Hey guys, tonight we are heading deep into the dusty plains of Tamaulipas, Mexico, a place where the sun doesn't just beat down, it seems to brand the earth. Imagine an endless horizon of parched soil and mesquite trees, their twisted branches creaking like tired old bones in the wind. Out here, the nights are quiet enough that you can hear a horse's hooves echoing for miles, and the days are so blistering you swear even time slows down to take shelter. And in this harsh corner of the world, a young boy named Juan García Ábrego is quietly learning the rules that would one day make him the mastermind behind one of the most powerful drug cartels on Earth. You probably won't survive this world, but Juan, he was built for it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The García Ábrego family home isn't much to look at. It's a small, single-story ranch house made of weathered bricks and roofed with rusting sheets of tin. Chickens roam freely in the dirt yard, pecking for scraps, and a tired-looking dog lays curled in the shade, barely raising an ear when someone walks by. Inside, Juan's mother keeps things neat, even though money is always tight. His father is a rancher, though rancher in this part of Tamaulipas is just a polite way of saying a man who works hard for almost nothing. They keep a few head of cattle and goats, the kind of herd you can count before you even finish your coffee. Juan, even as a boy, notices things. He notices how his father's hands are always cracked and bleeding, and how the money he brings home seems to vanish as quickly as it comes. He notices how some men in the community, men who don't seem to work nearly as hard, drive nicer trucks, wear crisp cowboy boots, and have plenty of cash to spend in the small cantina by the plaza. People call them smugglers, and while the church and the government warn that such a life leads to ruin, young Juan can't help but see that it also seems to lead to a full belly and a better roof. It's in this dusty, forgotten setting that Juan develops his quiet resilience. He's not loud or reckless like some of the other kids. Instead, he listens. He studies. He learns to read people, to catch the small lies in their voices and the subtle shifts in their expressions. And when the older boys dare each other to cross the river to steal watermelons from a nearby farm, Juan watches carefully before making his move. He doesn't want to get caught, but he also doesn't want to be left behind. One humid summer evening, his older cousin Humberto invites him along on a job. Humberto is one of those young men who's already started dabbling in cattle theft and other cross-border hustles, and Juan knows this is his first real test. The job is simple. Move a few stolen calves across a rough stretch of the Rio Grande before dawn. Humberto hands Juan a rope and tells him to keep quiet, no matter what he hears. It's pitch black as they ride their horses toward the river, and every splash of water sounds like a thunderclap. Juan's heart races when he spots a distant flashlight beam sweeping the far bank. The border patrol is out there somewhere, and for a moment he thinks they're doomed. But Humberto stays calm, whispering for Juan to follow his lead. They cross in a shallow spot known only to locals, the calves stumbling awkwardly through the current. When they make it to the other side, Humberto grins and slaps Juan on the back. "See? You're a natural," he says. Juan doesn't grin back, though. He just nods, already replaying every detail in his mind, already figuring out how to do it better next time. By the time they sell the calves for a modest profit, Juan knows something important. There's money to be made in these invisible borderlands, and it doesn't require breaking your back in the sun for a handful of pesos. Many people still think that boys like Juan were simply victims of their environment, pushed into crime by poverty and circumstance. So what do you think? Was it desperation? Or was there something in Juan's nature, an innate hunger, that made this life seem inevitable? As the months roll on, Juan keeps tagging along on these small-time jobs. He learns which dirt trails to take when you want to avoid the federales, and how to bribe a checkpoint officer with just enough cash to make him look the other way. He also learns the value of silence. Loose talk can get you killed, and Juan develops a reputation for keeping his mouth shut. In the cartel world, that's an asset. Late one night, after a particularly tense cattle run, Humberto pulls him aside. "You've got a good head for this," he says. "But cattle are nothing. The real money's in other things you don't ask about." Juan nods, and he doesn't ask, but he understands. Drugs, cocaine, marijuana, heroin. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it pays better than calves, and it's only a matter of time before he's drawn deeper into that world. The ranch fades further into the background as Juan begins spending more nights on the road. His father notices, but he doesn't ask questions either. Maybe he doesn't want to know. Maybe he already suspects. Juan's mother prays quietly at the small wooden altar in the corner of the house, lighting candles for her son's safety. One evening, Juan rides out alone into the desert to clear his head. The wind whistles through the scrub grass, and the stars above look close enough to touch. He knows the choices he's making will change his life, but there's no fear, only a strange sense of inevitability. Like the cattle drives and the river crossings, this next step feels like something he was born to do. The next morning, a Gulf Cartel intermediary named Miguel stops by Humberto's house. He's heard about the quiet young man who never talks out of turn. Juan is invited to run a special errand, and this time it's not about calves. It's about building trust with people who control an empire, and just like that, the dusty ranch kid from Tamaulipas takes his first deliberate step toward a world far larger and far more dangerous than he can yet imagine. The errand Juan is asked to run seems simple enough at first glance, but he senses immediately that this is no ordinary job. He's given a nondescript burlap sack tied tight with twine and a handwritten note that looks like it could be a shopping list, though the items don't make much sense together. He's told not to look inside the bag, not to read the note, and under no circumstances is he to stop along the way. The delivery point is in a remote town on the northern edge of Tamaulipas, near the main road that leads straight toward the U.S. border. The instructions come from Miguel, the Gulf Cartel intermediary who's been watching Juan closely since their brief introduction. "Do this right," Miguel says, his tone low and steady, "and doors will open for you. Do it wrong and, well, let's just say you'll close all your own doors forever." Juan doesn't need a diagram to understand the threat embedded in those words. He saddles up before dawn, the burlap sack tied securely to his horse's saddle horn. The desert air is chilly at this hour, a reminder that Tamaulipas can be cruel in more ways than one. He rides with a measured pace, mindful of every sound in the stillness. Occasionally he glances down at the sack, wondering what could be inside. Drugs? Money? Weapons? Maybe all three. He doesn't know, and more importantly, he doesn't ask. Halfway through the journey, a pair of dusty pickup trucks pull onto the road ahead, blocking his path. Federales. Two uniformed men climb out slowly, rifles slung over their shoulders. Juan's stomach tightens, but his face remains calm. One of the officers, a tall man with a thick mustache, approaches and signals for him to dismount. "Where are you headed, muchacho?" the officer asks, his voice carrying a note of false friendliness. Juan shrugs, deliberately keeping his answer vague. "Just visiting family," he says. The officer's gaze drifts to the burlap sack. "And what's in there?" Juan hesitates for only a fraction of a second before saying, "Tools. Some old tools my uncle needed. He fixes fences." The officer doesn't buy it entirely, but he also doesn't seem eager to waste too much time. He leans in close and lowers his voice. "You know, this road is dangerous. Things happen. Trucks disappear. People disappear." He rubs his fingers together in the universal gesture for a bribe. Juan pulls a folded wad of pesos from his pocket, money Miguel had given him for emergencies, and hands it over without a word. The officer counts it quickly, nods with satisfaction, and waves him through. As Juan remounts his horse, he can feel the man's eyes on his back. He knows that if he'd hesitated, if he'd said the wrong thing, things could have gone very badly. By the time he reaches the meeting point, a ramshackle cantina with peeling paint and a crooked sign, he's learned an important lesson. Bribery isn't just a tool, it's a language. And like any language, it can open doors if spoken fluently. Inside the cantina, the air is thick with cigarette smoke and the faint smell of spilled tequila. At a table in the back sits a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. He doesn't look up when Juan approaches. "You're late," the man says flatly. Juan sets the burlap sack on the table and slides it across. "The Federales stopped me," he explains, his voice calm and even. "But the bag's here, untouched." The man lifts the sack, weighing it in his hand before untying the twine. He glances inside briefly, then ties it shut again. "You did good," he says. "Most kids would have panicked." He reaches into his jacket and pulls out a roll of cash. "Your payment, and a message. Miguel says you're ready for more work." That night, Juan rides back to the ranch with a pocket full of cash and the quiet knowledge that he's crossed another invisible line. This isn't cattle theft anymore. This is the real game. In the following weeks, he runs more errands. Sometimes it's money, sometimes drugs, sometimes documents that could ruin lives if they ended up in the wrong hands. Each job is riskier than the last, but Juan never complains. He keeps his head down, does what's asked, and most importantly, never talks. Word spreads. Cartel lieutenants begin to notice the young man who doesn't flinch under pressure. When they need someone to take a car packed with cocaine across the Rio Grande, Juan is the first name they think of. One humid night, he's tasked with driving a beaten-up Chevy sedan into Texas. The instructions are simple. Follow the planned route. Don't speed, and if stopped, act like you're just another poor kid trying to visit family on the other side. Juan grips the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles ache, but he doesn't let it show. He crosses the border without incident, the checkpoint officer waving him through with barely a glance. In McAllen, Texas, he hands the car over to a contact in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The man counts the bricks of cocaine in the trunk, nods, and hands Juan an envelope thicker than any paycheck he's ever seen. As he drives back across the border, Juan can't help but think about how easy it was. Too easy. And that's when it clicks. The real power isn't in moving the drugs. It's in the network that makes the movement possible. The bribes, the safe houses, the bank accounts. all the invisible threads that keep the operation running smoothly. Many people still think that smugglers like Juan were just reckless kids with fast cars and quicker tempers. So, what do you think? Was this quiet, calculating young man simply lucky? Or was he already building the foundation of something far bigger than anyone around him could see? One thing is certain. He's no longer just a boy from a dusty ranch in Tamaulipas. He's becoming a key player, someone the Gulf Cartel will soon rely on to keep its empire humming. And as Juan begins to grasp the scale of the business he's stepping into, he also begins to see the possibilities. He can feel it now, the weight of destiny pressing on his shoulders. And instead of being crushed by it, he stands taller. Juan García Ábrego's rise within the Gulf Cartel is still modest at this point, but momentum is unmistakably on his side. His reputation for keeping his mouth shut and his hands steady under pressure makes him invaluable in a business where the smallest mistake can unravel entire operations. He doesn't talk unless he's spoken to. He doesn't question orders, and perhaps most importantly, he doesn't flaunt his earnings. Other young men in his position might have shown off their new wealth. Flashy boots, gold watches, or loud pickups. But Juan knows better. Flash draws attention, and attention is the last thing he wants right now. By now, Miguel has begun to trust him with more complex assignments. One involves coordinating multiple shipments of marijuana across 3 separate border crossings in a single night, each disguised as ordinary cargo. Juan is tasked with tracking the timing, ensuring that if one load is intercepted, the others slip through unnoticed. He studies the maps like a seasoned chess player, memorizing routes and calculating risks. The plan works flawlessly, and Miguel is impressed by how efficiently Juan keeps everything moving. It's during these early months of responsibility that Juan starts to learn the subtle internal politics of the Gulf Cartel. The organization is old, its roots stretching back decades, and its hierarchy is layered with men who have seen their share of bloodshed. At the top sits a council of older bosses, each controlling different territories and smuggling routes. Beneath them are lieutenants like Miguel, trusted enough to make big decisions, but still careful not to overstep. Juan watches these men closely. He notes who gets along, who doesn't, and who seems one betrayal away from making a fatal mistake. He isn't planning a coup, far from it. But he knows that understanding the web of alliances and rivalries could one day save his life. One evening, after a successful delivery, Miguel invites him to a small gathering at a ranch outside Reynosa. It's the first time Juan has been in the same room as the cartel elders, and he can feel the weight of their presence. These men exude quiet authority, speaking in low tones and rarely raising their voices. When they do glance in his direction, their eyes seem to pierce through him, as if measuring his worth with a single look. At dinner, Juan is careful not to speak unless addressed. When one of the bosses asks him how the shipments are running, he answers concisely, giving just enough detail to show he's competent without appearing boastful. His poise does not go unnoticed. Later that night, Miguel pulls him aside. "They liked you," he says simply. "Keep it up." From that night on, Juan's access to the higher levels of the organization grows. He begins to work directly with some of the lieutenants, helping them coordinate shipments not just into Texas, but also deeper into the United States, Houston, Dallas, even as far as Atlanta. He learns how to handle drivers, how to manage safe houses, and critically, how to move money without leaving a trail. One of his first lessons in money management comes from an older lieutenant named El Viejo. a grizzled veteran of the cartel who has seen enough betrayals to know the value of clean bookkeeping. El Viejo teaches Juan how to use legitimate businesses as fronts, small trucking companies, corner grocery stores, even used car lots. People see a car lot and they don't ask questions, El Viejo explains. They think you're just selling cars. They don't realize those cars are moving millions. Juan listens carefully, absorbing every detail. He begins to grasp that while drugs bring in the money, it's the laundering that keeps the machine alive. Without clean money, the entire operation would collapse under scrutiny. As the months roll by, Juan also starts to build his own network of contacts. He befriends a few border officials, slipping them envelopes of cash in exchange for reliable information about upcoming checkpoints or patrol shifts. He also learns which local politicians can be bought with donations to their campaign funds. The more connections he makes, the smoother the operation runs. Many people still think that cartels thrive only through violence, that brute force alone keeps the drugs flowing north. So what do you think? Was Juan succeeding because he was ruthless? Or was it because he understood something deeper? That money, not fear, is the true engine of power. Whatever the reason, his influence is expanding quietly. He's not the most senior man in the Gulf Cartel, not by a long shot, but he's becoming indispensable, and he knows it. One night, while overseeing a shipment moving through Matamoros, Juan pauses to reflect on how far he's come. Just a year ago, he was a ranch boy sneaking calves across the river. Now he's orchestrating multi-million-dollar operations with precision. He doesn't gloat, but there's a spark of satisfaction in his chest. After the final truck disappears into the darkness, Miguel calls him over. "There's talk of bigger things," he says. "We're opening new routes, and we need people we can trust." "I told them you're ready." Juan doesn't respond immediately. He's learned that silence, when used correctly, can be powerful. Finally, he nods. "I'll be there," he says, and just like that, he's pulled deeper into the core of the Gulf Cartel, a place where mistakes are punished brutally and loyalty is tested daily. He doesn't know exactly what awaits him, but he's certain of one thing. There's no going back now. As the trucks roll north and the profits roll in, Juan's world is about to grow larger than he ever imagined. Juan García Ábrego's responsibilities are no longer limited to the dusty ranch roads of Tamaulipas. He now finds himself making frequent trips across the border into Texas, where the real money and the real challenges await. These trips are not about carrying packages or driving cars loaded with contraband anymore. Instead, Juan is overseeing operations, meeting contacts, and cultivating the relationships that will give him a firm grip on cross-border smuggling. His first real test of leadership comes with a high-stakes shipment that must move from Matamoros, Mexico, into Houston. The load is huge. Several tons of marijuana hidden inside refrigerated trucks carrying produce. One wrong move could result in the seizure of not just the drugs, but the trucks themselves, the drivers, and months of careful planning. Juan spends the week leading up to the run reviewing every detail. He memorizes the schedule, knows the names of every driver, and even scouts the planned routes personally. He stops by the trucking depot in the dead of night, walking among the trucks with a quiet presence, checking the locks, the hidden compartments, and the driver's paperwork. He knows that confidence comes from preparation, and by the time the trucks roll out, he's certain they're as clean as they can be. The convoy crosses the border under the guise of delivering fresh produce. The drivers are instructed to stay calm, to answer questions briefly, and never to volunteer extra information. Juan watches from a distance as the trucks pass through the checkpoint, his jaw tight until the last one clears. When the convoy finally reaches Houston without incident, Juan exhales for the first time in hours. The money generated from this shipment alone is enough to fund the cartel's operations for months, and his careful planning has ensured it went off without a hitch. It's moments like these that begin to solidify Juan's reputation within the Gulf Cartel. He isn't just another smuggler moving product blindly from point A to point B. He's a strategist, someone who understands that the real power lies in controlling the routes and the infrastructure. In Texas, Juan also starts building connections with middlemen who can distribute the product further into the United States. He meets in quiet diners and back rooms, always keeping his voice low and his eyes sharp. These American contacts are essential. They have networks that stretch into major cities like Dallas, Atlanta, and Chicago. Juan knows that the further the drugs travel, the higher the profits become. He also discovers that money buys silence just as effectively in the United States as it does in Mexico. One of his most important relationships is with a customs official at a busy border crossing. The man, who Juan refers to only as Mr. Whiteshirt, ensures that trucks marked with a discreet signal, a single stripe of tape on the rear bumper, are waved through without inspection. The arrangement is costly, but the peace of mind is worth every dollar. As his confidence grows, Juan begins to experiment with new methods for smuggling. Hidden compartments in vehicles are standard practice, but he pushes his network to think bigger. He arranges for entire shipping containers to be loaded with contraband before leaving Mexican ports, disguised as legitimate cargo headed for Texas. He also experiments with using small planes for quicker deliveries, landing on improvised airstrips in rural areas. One late evening, while supervising one of these airdrops, Juan reflects on how much his life has changed. The young man who once rode a horse across the Rio Grande with a burlap sack now commands fleets of trucks, boats, and planes. Yet he remains calm, methodical, and careful never to attract attention. Many people still think that drug traffickers like Juan thrived on violence and intimidation alone. So, what do you think? Was his success built on fear? Or was it his ability to quietly outthink everyone around him? Juan knows the truth. Brute force can win battles, but strategy wins wars, and he is determined to win. One night, after another successful shipment reaches its destination, Miguel approaches Juan with an offer. "The bosses are impressed," he says. "They want you to start overseeing entire regions, not just individual runs. This means bigger paydays, but it also means bigger risks. You'll be responsible for everything that happens on those routes." Juan doesn't hesitate. He nods and accepts. That decision marks a turning point. He is no longer simply a reliable operative. He is now one of the Gulf Cartel's rising stars. A man whose decisions will shape the organization's future. The next few months are a whirlwind. Juan spends his time shuttling between Mexico and Texas, strengthening his network, tightening security, and expanding distribution routes. He becomes adept at moving in the shadows, keeping a low profile even as his influence grows. By the end of the year, his operations stretch across multiple U.S. states, and the profits are staggering. But Juan knows that success in this world is fragile. One slip, one betrayal, and everything could come crashing down. As he sits in a dimly lit office in Matamoros, reviewing ledgers filled with numbers too large for most people to comprehend, he reminds himself of a simple truth. Money isn't the end game. Money is just a tool, a way to buy security, loyalty, and time. And for Juan García Ábrego, time is everything. The farther Juan García Ábrego steps into the inner workings of the Gulf Cartel, the more he begins to think like a banker rather than a mere trafficker. It's not enough to move tons of marijuana or cocaine. It's about managing the profits, keeping the money invisible while making it work for the organization. He studies the business side with the same intensity he once studied maps of border routes. If he can master the flow of cash, he knows he can secure his place at the top. His first real lesson in money laundering comes from observing the older lieutenants, men who have quietly invested their illicit earnings into legitimate businesses. Juan realizes that while the drugs attract the authorities, the money can disappear into places no one would think to look. Banks, real estate developments, import-export companies, and even charitable foundations. It's a revelation, one that shifts the way he sees the entire enterprise. One afternoon, he sits in a modest office above a Matamoros car dealership that serves as one of the cartel's fronts. He watches as a trusted accountant shuffles paperwork, transforming bundles of cartel cash into profits from vehicle sales. "It's not about hiding the money," the accountant explains. "It's about making it look like it belongs." Juan nods, storing the wisdom away. Soon, he's not just observing, he's actively expanding the network. He opens small businesses in his own name, and in the names of trusted relatives. Tiny grocery stores, laundromats, trucking companies. Each one exists primarily on paper, but together they form a web of legitimate-seeming enterprises that can absorb millions of dollars without raising suspicion. He also begins experimenting with moving money through banks in Texas. He befriends a banker in Brownsville who is willing to accept large deposits in exchange for a generous bonus. The banker advises him on structuring deposits just under the reporting threshold, ensuring that the transactions never trigger alarms with federal regulators. Juan listens carefully, knowing this information could one day be the difference between freedom and a cell. As his empire grows, so does his understanding that relationships are as valuable as money. He cultivates ties with local politicians, discreetly donating to their campaigns or quietly covering the cost of community projects. He funds a new roof for a church in Matamoros, earns the gratitude of a mayor by financing a playground in a struggling neighborhood, and even sends envelopes of cash to police precincts to support officer morale. These gestures, though often small, buy him goodwill and silence. But Juan is not naive. He knows these same people will abandon him the moment they think he's a liability. That's why he focuses on building layers of security into every part of his operation. He insists that no one person ever knows the full picture. Drivers know only their immediate drop-off points. Couriers know only their specific routes. Even his accountants are kept in the dark about where the money ultimately goes. Many people still think that criminal empires like the Gulf Cartel were all about brute force and intimidation. So what do you think? Was Juan succeeding because of violence, or because he understood the value of discretion and compartmentalization? As the months roll by, his financial schemes become more sophisticated. He invests in upscale properties in Monterrey and Mexico City, renting them out through shell companies. He quietly buys shares in a shipping company that operates out of the port of Veracruz, gaining access to shipping containers that can slip through customs with little inspection. He even begins dabbling in foreign accounts, sending small amounts of money to banks in the Caribbean to test their security. Despite the complexity of his operations, Juan maintains a calm exterior. He never brags, never flashes his wealth, and never gives authorities a reason to notice him. In meetings with the cartel elders, He presents clean, organized ledgers that show steady profits. The older bosses appreciate his professionalism. They know how rare it is in their world. It's around this time that Juan begins to earn a nickname whispered among the lieutenants: El Banquero, the banker. He wears the title like a badge of honor, not because it sounds glamorous, but because it signifies control. One night, while sitting alone in his office in Matamoros, Juan studies a ledger filled with neatly written numbers. Each line represents more than just money. It represents power, influence, and insulation from the chaos that has claimed so many others in this world. He knows that as long as he controls the money, he controls the cartel's future. But he also knows this truth: success breeds envy. And already, some of his rivals within the Gulf Cartel are beginning to whisper that Juan is growing too powerful, too indispensable. For now, Juan keeps his head down and his focus sharp, but he can sense the winds shifting, and he knows it's only a matter of time before someone tests his position. By the time Juan García Ábrego earns the moniker El Banquero, he is already thinking several moves ahead. The nickname is flattering, yes, but it also paints a target on his back. In the cartel world, the man who handles the money is often the most valuable and the most vulnerable piece on the board. One betrayal, one loose end, and he could find himself cut off or worse. Juan's response is not to retreat, but to expand. He begins to forge connections north of the border that go beyond the usual buyers and distributors. He wants eyes and ears inside the institutions that could threaten him: law enforcement, customs, even banks. It's not enough to bribe people at the local level. He needs influence that can shape investigations before they even begin. One of his first breakthroughs comes through an unlikely source: a border official in Texas who goes by the name Dale. Dale is a mid-level employee with a gambling problem, and Juan's people quietly offer to cover his debts in exchange for cooperation. It starts small: advance warnings about upcoming inspections, or tips about which checkpoints are running tighter than usual. But as the relationship deepens, Juan is able to orchestrate entire shipments based on the intelligence Dale provides. He also makes a point of strengthening ties with bankers in Houston and Dallas, men who have no problem turning a blind eye as long as their institutions benefit. Juan's financial footprint in the United States begins to grow subtly, hidden behind layers of shell companies and false identities. Money moves seamlessly from Mexico into Texas and beyond, reinvested into real estate and other assets that look completely legitimate on paper. Meanwhile, back in Mexico, Juan continues to cultivate relationships with powerful politicians. He attends quiet dinners at upscale restaurants in Monterrey, where he sits at the table with governors and senators. They don't openly discuss the Gulf Cartel, of course, but everyone knows why Juan is there. His donations to their campaigns and community projects buy influence that is far more valuable than loyalty. One evening, after a particularly productive dinner, a Monterrey politician leans in and whispers, "You're different from the others. You're not reckless." Juan simply nods. He knows this perception, that he is calm, methodical, and pragmatic, is his greatest asset. But with his growing power comes growing suspicion. Some of the older Gulf Cartel bosses begin to question whether Juan is becoming too independent. He notices subtle shifts in their tone during meetings, small slights that might seem meaningless to an outsider. Juan doesn't react outwardly, but he files these observations away. Many people still think that the biggest threat to cartel leaders came from outside forces, like the DEA or rival organizations. So what do you think? Was Juan's real danger the authorities, or was it the men sitting across from him at the table? One incident cements his understanding of just how precarious his position is. A convoy of trucks carrying cocaine from Matamoros is ambushed on a rural highway, and several of his men are killed. At first, Juan suspects a rival cartel, but whispers begin circulating that someone within the Gulf Cartel leaked the route. The attack seems too precise, too well timed to be a coincidence. In response, Juan tightens security around his operations even further. He starts rotating drivers more frequently, changing routes at the last minute, and using encrypted radios for communication. He also begins vetting everyone in his circle, looking for signs of betrayal. It's during this period of heightened paranoia that Juan deepens his connections with Colombian suppliers. He flies to Bogotá under the radar, meeting with emissaries of the Cali cartel. The Colombians appreciate Juan's banker-like approach to business. Unlike other Mexican traffickers who waste money on flashy displays, Juan invests in infrastructure and logistics. He's reliable, and reliability is priceless in this trade. The deal he strikes with the Cali cartel is monumental. In exchange for guaranteed distribution into the United States, Juan secures a steady supply of high-quality cocaine at competitive prices. This partnership allows the Gulf Cartel to leapfrog its competitors, expanding its footprint deeper into the American market. Juan's influence is now felt across borders and continents, but he refuses to get complacent. He keeps a low profile, rarely appearing in public, and avoids any behavior that could draw unnecessary attention. While other cartel leaders pose for photos at nightclubs, Juan prefers quiet offices and private meetings. One night, as he sits in his Matamoros office reviewing financial ledgers, Miguel steps inside with news. The bosses are restless, Miguel says. They think you're getting too powerful. Juan looks up calmly. I'm not too powerful, he says. I'm too necessary. And in that moment, he understands his strategy better than ever. He doesn't need to be the loudest voice in the room. He just needs to make himself indispensable. The man no one can afford to lose. Juan García Ábrego's growing reach now extends deep into Texas and beyond. But he knows that distribution and logistics are only part of the puzzle. To maintain his edge, he needs stability in the supply chain. And that means securing a long-term relationship with Colombia's most powerful exporters of cocaine. It's 1992 when Juan boards a discreet charter flight bound for Bogotá, traveling under a false name and with a small security team. The Gulf Cartel's emissary status isn't widely known outside his closest circle, and Juan prefers it that way. When he lands in Colombia, he's driven to a secluded estate surrounded by thick jungle and guarded by men armed with assault rifles. This is the home of a Cali cartel associate, one of the key power brokers in South America's cocaine empire. The negotiations begin over dinner, a spread of grilled meats and fine wines set out on a long wooden table. Juan, dressed simply in a tailored shirt and boots, makes his case with the same calm confidence that has carried him this far. He explains that the Gulf Cartel can guarantee smooth distribution into the United States, leveraging its secure border routes and trusted network of middlemen. The Colombians listen carefully. They know Juan's reputation as El Banquero and respect his ability to keep operations running quietly. Still, they push for better terms, testing his resolve. Juan doesn't flinch. He's prepared with data, quantities moved, prices achieved, losses minimized, and his professionalism impresses them. By the end of the night, a deal is struck. The Cali cartel will provide a steady supply of cocaine, and the Gulf Cartel will handle distribution. Profits will be split, and both sides will benefit from each other's strengths. It's a handshake agreement, sealed with quiet nods and promises rather than any formal contract. When Juan returns to Mexico, the impact of this partnership is immediate. The flow of cocaine through Gulf Cartel channels increases dramatically, and with it, the profits. Shipments that once carried marijuana now move far more lucrative cargo. The money pouring in is staggering, and Juan channels it through his growing web of legitimate businesses. But success brings new challenges. Rivals within the Gulf Cartel begin to grumble that Juan is consolidating too much power. Some accuse him of cutting them out of deals or hoarding profits. Juan knows that jealousy can be just as dangerous as law enforcement. He makes small gestures, handing out bonuses, funding community projects in his rivals' territories. But he also quietly strengthens his own security. One evening, while meeting with Miguel in a quiet Matamoros warehouse, Juan receives troubling news. "There's talk," Miguel says, "that some of the old bosses want to remind you who's in charge." Juan leans back in his chair, expression unreadable. "Remind me?" he asks softly. Miguel nods. "They think you've grown too independent, too big." Juan doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he studies the warehouse floor, where workers are sealing packages of cocaine into compartments in tractor trailers. Finally, he says, "We'll remind them who keeps the money flowing." Many people still think that the greatest danger to cartel leaders came from the authorities or rival gangs. So what do you think? Was Juan's true threat external, or was it the men within his own ranks who feared his growing influence? As tensions simmer, Juan focuses on making the cartel even more efficient. He develops new smuggling techniques, hiding drugs inside hollowed-out shipments of produce, furniture, even concrete beams. He experiments with using commercial airlines, bribing baggage handlers to load cocaine onto flights bound for U.S. cities. Each method is tested, refined, and deployed on a larger scale only when he's confident it will work. He also strengthens his ties with his Colombian suppliers. He invites them to visit Mexico, showing off the sophistication of his operation. They're impressed by his discipline, his ability to move enormous quantities without attracting headlines. The Colombians, who have seen too many flamboyant traffickers bring down entire empires, view Juan as the ideal partner. At the same time, Juan continues to cultivate key contacts within Mexican law enforcement. He knows that a single phone call from the right official can mean the difference between a shipment reaching its destination or being seized. Bribes flow freely, but they're always delivered discreetly, often disguised as campaign donations or gifts. One night, while reviewing financial ledgers in his Monterrey office, Juan receives a coded radio message from one of his lieutenants. A truck carrying a massive load of cocaine has been stopped by federal police on a rural highway. Juan doesn't panic. Instead, he makes 2 phone calls, one to a trusted contact in the federal police and another to a local politician. Within an hour, the truck is released, its contents untouched. The incident reinforces what Juan already knows. Power doesn't come from weapons or muscle. It comes from relationships and influence. But even as his network grows stronger, Juan can feel the undercurrents shifting. The whispers about his independence are becoming louder. Some of the older bosses are wary of his banker's mindset, worried he's turning the cartel into something they no longer fully control. One evening, after a tense meeting in Reynosa, Juan confides in Miguel. "We've built something solid," he says, "but solid things attract pressure. If we're not careful, they'll try to break us from the inside." He knows the game has changed. The question now isn't just how to grow the empire, but how to protect it from enemies both seen and unseen. Juan García Ábrego has reached a level of influence where his face is rarely seen in public, yet his presence is felt everywhere. He is now the man who can move billions of dollars worth of narcotics with a single nod, and more importantly, he is the man who can make those billions disappear cleanly into the banking system. But with this kind of success comes an inevitable consequence: the need to keep more and more people quiet. It starts with police commanders in Tamaulipas. Some of these men have been on the take for years, but as Juan's operations grow larger, the scale of the bribes must also grow. He has learned that buying silence is a constant negotiation. Pay too little, and loyalty evaporates. Pay too much, and you attract suspicion. He handles it delicately, often sending intermediaries to deliver the cash in ways that make the recipients feel important. Consider it a gesture of respect, he tells them, through his emissaries. But Juan doesn't stop with police. He reaches higher into the Mexican government. He begins funding election campaigns for governors and congressional candidates, often through legitimate donations. Those who win owe him favors. Those who lose still pocket his money, grateful to be on his good side. He even manages to place sympathetic officials inside key customs offices, ensuring that his shipments pass through the border with minimal interference. One evening in Mexico City, Juan attends a private dinner with a small group of influential politicians. The meeting takes place in a gated mansion with marble floors and armed guards stationed at every corner. Over glasses of aged tequila, the conversation drifts towards security cooperation and economic development, polite euphemisms for the favors Juan expects in return for his contributions. A senator, emboldened by drink, leans in and says, "You're the most disciplined man I've met in this business. You don't flaunt it." Juan offers a faint smile. "Flaunting it gets you noticed," he replies. This discipline is one reason why he remains untouchable. While rival traffickers flaunt luxury cars and public parties, Juan maintains a low profile. He prefers quiet meetings in dimly lit rooms and leaves the headlines to men foolish enough to court them. But keeping officials on his payroll is only one part of the equation. Juan also needs to maintain control within the Gulf Cartel itself. He knows that jealousy among his lieutenants could ignite internal violence. To prevent this, he cleverly redistributes resources. Each lieutenant receives just enough product and profit to remain loyal, but never enough to challenge him directly. Many people still think that bribery was simply about money changing hands in envelopes. So what do you think? Was Juan's strategy really about cash? Or was it about making everyone feel like they were part of something larger than themselves? As the years pass, Juan's network of political protection grows deeper. He is rumored to have friends in the Mexican Attorney General's office, men who can make entire case files disappear. When DEA agents request cooperation from Mexican authorities, their inquiries often hit a wall. "We'll look into it," they are told, only to find the trail going cold within days. Meanwhile, Juan is expanding his empire further into the United States. He develops new distribution cells in Florida and California, using intermediaries to keep his own name off the radar. The cocaine moving through Gulf Cartel pipelines is now feeding major American cities, and the profits are astronomical. One night in Monterey, Juan reviews a set of ledgers that reveal the sheer scale of his operation. Tens of millions of dollars moving every week, all of it laundered through a labyrinth of businesses and accounts. He knows the DEA is trying to piece it together, but he also knows they are years behind. Yet even with all his precautions, Juan senses that his invincibility has limits. Corruption is a double-edged sword. The same officials who protect him today could betray him tomorrow if the price is right. And within the cartel, there are whispers of dissatisfaction. Some lieutenants feel they are working harder than ever, but seeing smaller shares of the profits. In response, Juan increases the bonuses for his most loyal men, hosting a quiet gathering at a luxury ranch in Tamaulipas. He makes a point of praising their work, shaking hands and sharing drinks. "We're building something that will outlast all of us," he tells them, his voice calm but firm. The message is clear. Loyalty will be rewarded. But privately, Juan confides in Miguel. "It's like building a dam," he says. "The higher the water rises, the more pressure there is behind it. One crack, and the whole thing can collapse." Miguel nods, understanding. "So we make sure there are no cracks." Juan smiles faintly but doesn't reply. He knows that no system is perfect, and that the larger his empire grows, the harder it becomes to control every variable. For now, though, the Gulf Cartel is running at peak efficiency. The money flows, the drugs flow, and the politicians continue to look the other way. But Juan can feel the weight of it all, the sense that every decision he makes now carries even greater consequences. He reminds himself of the rule that has guided him since the beginning. Keep quiet, stay indispensable, and never believe your own myth, because in his world, myths tend to end badly. By the mid-1990s, Juan García Ábrego's control over Gulf Coast smuggling routes is nearly absolute. From the dusty back roads of Tamaulipas to the interstates of Texas, his network hums with clockwork precision. Shipments move north with stunning regularity, and cash pours south in a seemingly endless tide. But as any seasoned operator knows, success in the drug trade never goes unnoticed for long. The first signs of trouble come in whispers. Drivers mention seeing unfamiliar vehicles tailing them near the border. Safe house managers report strangers asking too many questions in small towns. Juan's contacts inside Mexican law enforcement tell him that DEA agents are becoming more aggressive, expanding their investigations into the Gulf Cartel's activities. Juan doesn't panic. Instead, he leans into what has always been his strength: preparation. He orders his lieutenants to tighten security, rotating safe houses more frequently, and using decoy shipments to throw off investigators. Trucks are now loaded with layers of legitimate cargo, produce, furniture, or even livestock, concealing drugs hidden deep within. One night, in a quiet ranch house outside Reynosa, Juan convenes a meeting with his most trusted lieutenants. Maps and ledgers are spread across a large wooden table as they discuss routes, profits, and vulnerabilities. "We must think like they do," Juan says calmly. "They expect us to move quickly, so we slow down. They expect us to use the same roads, so we change the roads." Miguel, who has been with Juan since the early days, raises a concern. Changing routes means more delays. More delays mean more risk of products spoiling or being intercepted. Juan nods. "Yes, but it also means fewer patterns for them to follow. We're not in a race, we're in a business." It's this measured approach that allows the Gulf Cartel to stay one step ahead, at least for now. But Juan knows the DEA is closing in. He's heard from his contacts in Texas that they are working with U.S. Customs and the FBI to gather intelligence on his organization. Many people still think that law enforcement only caught cartel leaders through luck or informants. So what do you think? Was the DEA closing in on Juan because they were good, or because someone inside his network was slipping? The possibility of betrayal gnaws at Juan. He begins quietly vetting his inner circle, watching for signs of disloyalty. He notices who avoids his gaze during meetings, who hesitates when answering questions, and who seems to be living beyond their means. He knows that paranoia can be dangerous, but complacency can be fatal. At the same time, Juan invests even more heavily in political protection. He increases his donations to key Mexican politicians, ensuring that any official investigation into the Gulf Cartel will be bogged down in bureaucracy. He also ramps up efforts to cultivate contacts in the United States. Though he knows that American law enforcement is harder to influence, one of his boldest moves is to begin laundering money through major U.S. financial institutions. Using layers of shell companies and offshore accounts, he funnels cartel cash into legitimate investments, shopping centers, office buildings, and even luxury apartment complexes. The banks, eager for deposits, rarely ask questions. Juan's ability to operate at this level makes him an enigma to the DEA. He isn't a flashy kingpin with a taste for nightclubs and exotic cars. He's careful, methodical, and seemingly invisible. Agents grow frustrated as leads dry up and informants provide little actionable intelligence. But Juan also understands that invisibility has its limits. One mistake, one compromised shipment, could expose the entire operation. That's why he insists on personally reviewing reports from every major route, even if it means staying up late into the night with stacks of ledgers. One evening, while poring over these reports, Juan receives word of a troubling incident. A truck carrying cocaine has vanished somewhere between Monterrey and Laredo. No driver, no product, no trace. It's a significant loss, and Juan suspects sabotage. The next day, he calls Miguel into his office. "Someone is testing us," Juan says, his voice low. "Find out who." Miguel nods grimly. Juan knows that losing one shipment isn't the end of the world, but it's the pattern he fears. If someone inside the cartel is leaking information, it could unravel everything he's built. He tightens his circle even further, cutting off anyone whose loyalty isn't ironclad. He instructs his lieutenants to stop using phones for sensitive communications, relying instead on in-person meetings and encrypted radios. Despite these measures, Juan can feel the walls beginning to close in. There are simply too many moving parts, too many people involved for absolute security. He tells himself that he can weather the storm, that his political connections and careful planning will keep him safe. But deep down, he knows the DEA is patient, and patience in the end may be the one thing even his money can't buy. Juan García Ábrego's empire is now so vast that he rarely sees its full scale at once. Instead, it exists as reports on ledgers and coded messages from lieutenants scattered across Mexico and the United States. Yet in the midst of this enormous enterprise, he continues to operate with the quiet precision of a banker. He trusts systems, not individuals, because he knows individuals can betray you. It's around this time that Juan begins to rely heavily on private aircraft. The planes, small, nondescript jets and twin-engine propeller planes, allow him to travel between Mexico, Texas, and even Colombia without attracting too much attention. The pilots are carefully selected and paid handsomely for their discretion. These flights also make it easier for Juan to oversee operations personally, allowing him to appear at distribution hubs and meetings without the delays and risks of ground travel. One night, while flying from Monterrey to a small private airstrip outside Houston, Juan gazes out the window at the grid of glowing city lights below. He's aware that U.S. authorities are on high alert for suspicious flights, but he feels confident in his arrangements. The flight plans are filed under false identities, and the planes often carry legitimate cargo alongside their illicit payloads. In Houston, Juan meets with one of his most important American contacts, a low-profile businessman who is quietly invested in his laundering network. They sit in a dimly lit office, sipping coffee and reviewing real estate projects funded by cartel money. Shopping centers, apartment complexes, commercial warehouses, all perfectly legal, all designed to soak up millions in profits. "You've got a gift for this," the businessman says, tapping the ledger with admiration. Juan shrugs. "It's just math. Keep the money moving and it stays invisible." But invisibility is becoming harder to maintain. DEA agents are working closely with U.S. Customs and the FBI, and Juan's name is beginning to circulate in intelligence briefings. They refer to him as the banker of the Gulf, a man who can move money and product with unmatched efficiency. Many people still think that cartel leaders were brought down by single catastrophic mistakes. So what do you think? Was the DEA closing in because Juan slipped? Or was it because they were slowly building a web he couldn't escape? Back in Mexico, Juan continues to expand his network of businesses. He now owns stakes in private banks in Monterrey and Mexico City, giving him even greater control over the flow of money. He also invests in high-end real estate developments, buying properties in the names of distant relatives and trusted associates. These investments not only launder money, but also generate legitimate income, making it even harder for authorities to distinguish criminal profits from legal ones. Despite the sophistication of his operation, Juan never grows complacent. He knows that greed and carelessness have destroyed countless traffickers before him. That's why he continues to live modestly, at least by cartel standards. He avoids ostentatious displays of wealth, preferring quiet dinners with close allies over lavish parties. But not everyone in the Gulf Cartel shares his discipline. Younger lieutenants, flush with cash, begin to draw attention with flashy cars and extravagant lifestyles. Juan warns them to tone it down, but some don't listen. Their recklessness brings unwanted scrutiny from law enforcement, and Juan knows it's only a matter of time before one of them slips up. One afternoon, Juan receives a coded message. A private jet carrying a major shipment of cocaine has been seized in Florida. The loss is significant, but what alarms Juan most is how quickly U.S. authorities intercepted the plane. Someone had to have tipped them off. He calls Miguel into his office and lays the telegram on the desk. "We have a leak," he says quietly. Miguel nods grimly. "Do you want me to start with the pilots?" "Start with everyone," Juan replies. "No one is above suspicion." From that day forward, Juan becomes even more cautious. He stops traveling as frequently, relying on trusted intermediaries to handle meetings. He also begins shifting some of the cartel's profits into foreign banks, particularly in the Caribbean, where U.S. authorities have less visibility. One night, while reviewing bank statements from an offshore account, Juan allows himself a rare moment of reflection. He's built an empire that stretches across borders, one that moves billions of dollars in drugs and cash every year. Yet he feels the pressure building. Every new shipment, every new deposit, carries the risk of exposure. He knows he's in uncharted territory now. Few traffickers have ever operated at this level for long without falling. And while Juan has always believed he's smarter and more disciplined than those who came before, he also knows that hubris can be fatal. As he closes the ledger and locks it in a steel safe, Juan reminds himself of the rule that has kept him alive all these years: never believe your own myth. The Gulf Cartel is stronger than ever, but the walls around Juan García Ábrego are slowly closing in. By now, Juan García Ábrego's empire is less a collection of smuggling operations and more a sprawling financial organism. Trucks, ships, planes, cash, and real estate all feed into one another, reinforcing a system designed to be as resilient as it is invisible. But even the strongest systems have weak points, and Juan knows that one misstep could bring everything down. He spends his days in motion, rarely staying in one place long enough to become predictable. Safe houses in Reynosa, Monterrey, and Mexico City offer temporary shelter, each one outfitted with secure communications, cash reserves, and trusted staff. These locations are fortified but not ostentatious. Juan believes in being unremarkable, a shadow that never lingers. One quiet afternoon in Matamoros, he sits in a small office above a seemingly ordinary import-export business. Ledgers are spread across the table, documenting profits that could rival the budgets of small nations. An accountant updates him on new laundering strategies, transferring small sums into a network of offshore banks, then reinvesting the cleaned money into legitimate companies. Juan listens closely, occasionally nodding. "We've reached the point," the accountant says, "where the money could survive even if the cartel didn't. You've insulated it well." Juan doesn't smile at the compliment. "That's the point," he says softly. "It has to outlast everything, even me." Still, he knows the operation is only as strong as the people running it. That's why he's constantly auditing his lieutenants. Each one manages specific territories and revenue streams, and Juan demands precise accountability. If numbers don't add up, questions are asked. If the answers don't satisfy, replacements are made. This relentless oversight keeps the organization efficient, but it also breeds resentment. Some lieutenants feel suffocated by Juan's tight control. "He doesn't trust anyone," one whispers to another. "One day, that will be his weakness." Many people still think that drug lords fell because of their enemies. So what do you think? Was Juan's greatest threat really external? Or was it the seeds of discontent within his own house? As his power grows, Juan continues to invest in legitimate businesses, particularly real estate. Apartment complexes, shopping centers, hotels, all of them bought through shell corporations. He even ventures into banking, quietly acquiring stakes in smaller Mexican banks where he can influence internal oversight. But even with these layers of protection, Juan knows the DEA is out there, gathering intelligence piece by piece. He's heard rumors of task forces dedicated solely to bringing him down, and though he doesn't panic, he takes them seriously. To stay ahead, he expands his security protocols. He stops using telephones for anything important, instead relying on encrypted radios or in-person meetings. Drivers are rotated constantly, and shipments are rerouted at the last minute to prevent patterns. He also creates redundancy in the organization. If one smuggling route is compromised, 3 others can pick up the slack. One evening, while meeting with Miguel in Monterrey, Juan receives troubling news. A trusted banker in Texas has been subpoenaed by federal investigators. If the man talks, entire portions of the laundering network could be exposed. "Should we take care of it?" Miguel asks delicately. Juan shakes his head. "No, that draws attention. We'll move the money instead. By the time they finish asking questions, there will be nothing left to find." This is Juan's genius. He doesn't panic or lash out. He simply adapts, shifting assets to other accounts, other banks, other countries. But even as he maneuvers with his usual precision, Juan senses that the margin for error is shrinking. The DEA is patient, and each year they grow more sophisticated. He knows they are building a case against him, one piece at a time. Late one night, as he reviews the latest financial reports in a safe house outside Reynosa, Juan pauses to rub his temples. The numbers are perfect, but perfection feels fragile. He can't help but think of the traffickers who came before him, men who believed they were untouchable until the day they weren't. He glances at Miguel, who is leaning against the wall, silent as always. "Do you remember the day we moved those calves across the river?" Juan asks suddenly. Miguel chuckles softly. "How could I forget? We thought we were outlaws." Juan nods. "Back then, We had nothing to lose. Now we have everything. That's the difference. He doesn't say it aloud, but he knows the weight of everything he's built could soon become the very thing that brings him down. By the mid-1990s, Juan García Ábrego is not just a trafficker. He is the quiet architect of a financial empire. Yet behind the calm veneer, there is turbulence brewing. Rivals in the Gulf Cartel resent his growing dominance, and whispers of betrayal circulate like dust in the Tamaulipas wind. Juan senses it, the way a rancher senses a storm rolling in from the horizon. The first crack appears in an unexpected place. A shipment of cocaine bound for Houston is intercepted at the border, not by random chance, but with alarming precision. The drugs are seized, the drivers arrested, and before Juan can even react, American newspapers are reporting a major blow to the Gulf Cartel. Juan doesn't rage. Rage is for men who lose control. Instead, he gathers his inner circle at a secluded ranch outside Matamoros. Around a long table cluttered with maps and ledgers, he listens as lieutenants argue about who is to blame. Some point fingers at corrupt officials, others at rival cartels. Juan raises a hand and the room falls silent. This didn't happen by luck, he says evenly. Someone gave them the route. Someone in this room, or someone close to one of you. Miguel, loyal as ever, scans the table. Do you want me to start pulling people in? Juan shakes his head. Not yet. We tighten everything first. No one moves without my approval. From that day, new protocols are put in place. Shipments are split into smaller loads to minimize losses. Routes are changed frequently, sometimes at the very last moment. Trusted drivers are rotated out if they become too familiar with the patterns. The cartel becomes harder to track, but the atmosphere of suspicion deepens. Many people still think that law enforcement only caught traffickers by brute force. But what do you think? Was it the DEA closing in, or was it the slow rot of betrayal eating away from within? Juan continues to buy silence where he can. In Mexico, he increases payments to politicians and police commanders, making sure everyone with influence understands how much they stand to lose if he falls. He also quietly strengthens his Colombian ties, ensuring that even if his Mexican routes are disrupted, the supply chain remains secure. But there are limits to how far bribes can reach. In the United States, the DEA has intensified its efforts, forming a task force focused entirely on the Gulf Cartel. Agents are piecing together fragments of evidence, bank transfers, intercepted communications, and testimonies from low-level operatives willing to trade information for reduced sentences. One evening, in his Monterey safe house, Juan receives a report that a mid-level operative has disappeared after being questioned by U.S. authorities. The man's sudden vanishing is a bad sign. It means the DEA may now have an insider who can map out parts of the organization. We have to move faster, Juan tells Miguel, before they connect the dots. He orders assets to be shifted into foreign accounts at an accelerated pace. Properties are sold quietly, often to shell companies that Juan himself controls. At the same time, he begins creating more distance between himself and day-to-day operations. Trusted lieutenants handle the logistics, while Juan focuses on strategy and financial oversight. But even as he steps back, he can feel the noose tightening. His contacts in the Mexican Attorney General's office tell him that pressure from the United States is mounting. Washington is demanding action, and Mexican authorities, once content to look the other way, are beginning to cooperate. One night, while dining at a discreet restaurant in Mexico City, a high-ranking official leans in and offers a chilling warning. "You've kept yourself safe for a long time," the man says. But the Americans want a trophy. They won't stop until they get one. Be careful. Juan nods, his expression unreadable. But inside, he knows the official is right. He recalls the early days, when he was just a ranch kid running calves across the Rio Grande. Back then, the stakes were small, and the risks seemed manageable. Now, his empire spans continents, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Late that night, back at his safe house, Juan sits alone at a desk, reviewing the latest financial statements. The numbers are flawless, yet they offer no comfort. He knows that his greatest strength, his meticulous control, can't stop the forces now converging on him. He turns to Miguel, who has been watching quietly from the doorway. "Do you remember what I said about the dam?" Juan asks. Miguel nods. "The higher the water rises, the more pressure there is behind it." Juan closes the ledger. It's starting to crack. The Gulf Cartel's empire continues to hum with apparent strength, but Juan García Ábrego knows better than to be fooled by appearances. He feels it in the air. The DEA has grown too focused, too deliberate in its movements. Gone are the days when U.S. authorities seemed perpetually a step behind. Now, Juan can sense them circling, and he knows it's only a matter of time before they close in. At a ranch outside Reynosa, Juan meets with his closest advisors. Maps and documents cover the table, while radios crackle faintly in the background. The Americans are tightening their net, Miguel says, pointing to recent seizures along the border. "They're not just hitting random loads anymore. They're targeting our key routes." Juan studies the map without speaking. Finally, he looks up. "They've figured out our patterns, so we stop being predictable. Rotate everyone. Change everything." He orders a complete overhaul of logistics. Trucks are sent on indirect, zigzagging routes, sometimes doubling back through small towns before heading north. Safe houses are abandoned with only hours' notice, replaced with new locations. Even lieutenants who have been in place for years are reassigned. These moves buy time, but they also breed paranoia. Some lieutenants bristle at the constant changes, seeing them as a sign that Juan no longer trusts them. He notices the tension, but doesn't try to soothe it. "Trust is earned every day," he tells Miguel quietly. "Not once." Many people still think that Juan's downfall was a single event. But what do you think? Was it really a sudden collapse? Or was it this slow erosion from within and without that made him vulnerable? While the cartel adapts, the DEA task force in Houston is gathering intelligence at a relentless pace. They flip low-level drivers, offering lighter sentences in exchange for details about routes and safe houses. Each confession is a small thread, and slowly, those threads begin to form a web. One of the most troubling developments comes from Mexico City, where Juan's contacts in the Attorney General's office warn him that U.S. officials are pressuring Mexico to take direct action. Washington wants a major arrest, someone high-profile enough to make headlines. Juan listens carefully to these warnings, but he refuses to run. He believes his political connections are strong enough to shield him, as they have in the past. "They won't touch me," he tells Miguel one evening. "I've made myself too valuable to too many people." But even as he says it, he feels a flicker of doubt. One incident in particular shakes him. A convoy carrying a significant load of cocaine is ambushed not by rivals, but by Mexican federal police working in coordination with the DEA. Several of Juan's men are arrested, and the product is seized. This kind of precision operation is unprecedented, and Juan knows it means the Americans and Mexicans are sharing intelligence at a level he hasn't seen before. That night, he sits alone in a safe house in Monterey, staring at the ledgers on his desk. The numbers are still strong, but they suddenly seem fragile, as if one good push could topple the entire empire. Miguel enters the room quietly. "We could move you," he suggests. "Go underground for a while. Costa Rica, maybe. Let the heat die down." Juan shakes his head. "If I disappear, they'll see it as weakness. That's when they'll strike." He decides instead to double down on his political connections. He arranges private dinners with governors, senators, and even federal officials, reminding them of the favors he's done and the money he's provided. Some reassure him that he is untouchable. Others avoid giving him a direct answer. The uncertainty gnaws at him. He knows that corruption is a fickle shield. The same officials who once took his money could turn on him if they believe cooperating with the Americans serves their interests better. Late one evening, Juan reflects on how different life was when he first started. Back then, the risks were immediate and obvious. A missed border crossing, a corrupt cop demanding a bribe, a rival looking to make a name. Now, the danger is abstract but far more dangerous. A coalition of agencies quietly working to dismantle everything he has built. As he gazes out the window at the sprawling lights of Monterey, Juan mutters to himself, "We've built something so big they can't ignore it." He doesn't know yet that being impossible to ignore is precisely what will bring the storm crashing down. Juan García Ábrego's sense of control, once so unshakable, is beginning to erode. He doesn't show it, of course. In every meeting, he remains the same measured, soft-spoken presence, the man who handles billions of dollars without breaking a sweat. But behind his calm expression, he is tallying risks and asking himself hard questions about who he can still trust. The DEA task force is no longer just a distant rumor. Reports from his contacts in Mexico City confirm that American agents are working hand-in-hand with select Mexican federal units, forming joint teams with unprecedented coordination. The raids that follow are surgical. Stash houses in Matamoros and Reynosa are hit with precision. High-value shipments are seized, and lieutenants are arrested or vanish without explanation. One evening, Juan receives word that an entire safe house network in Texas has been compromised. Miguel brings him the report, his expression grave. "We lost everything in Houston. The house, the drivers, the product. It's all gone." Juan leans back in his chair, silent for a long moment. Finally, he says, "Someone gave them the address." Miguel nods. "We're looking into it, but if they've flipped someone, it could be anyone." That possibility forces Juan to reevaluate everyone in his inner circle. He starts holding smaller, more private meetings. No more large gatherings at ranches. Instead, he prefers quiet one-on-ones, often changing locations at the last moment. He has lieutenants followed, not because he enjoys the intrusion, but because he must know if anyone is double-dealing. The paranoia is exhausting, but Juan knows it's necessary. Many people still think that drug lords fall because of dramatic ambushes or bold law enforcement raids. So what do you think? Was Juan's empire cracking from outside pressure, or was it collapsing because the trust that held it together was dissolving from within? Meanwhile, the whispers among his rivals grow louder. Some of the older Gulf Cartel bosses resent Juan's tight control and his habit of holding the financial reins so closely. They fear that his banker's approach has made them too dependent on him, and dependency breeds resentment. One night, while Juan is reviewing ledgers in a Monterey safe house, Miguel quietly informs him that a group of lieutenants met without his knowledge. "They're talking about alternatives," Miguel says. "They think you've centralized too much power. They're worried you'll bring heat down on all of us." Juan nods slowly. "Let them talk," he says. "They can't move product without my network. They can't launder a peso without my banks. They'll come back when they realize that." But Juan knows that he can't rely on fear or necessity alone to keep people loyal. He begins making quiet concessions, offering bigger profit shares, approving shipments for rivals who felt sidelined, even backing off certain territories to ease tensions. It's a balancing act, one that requires as much diplomacy as it does strategy. At the same time, Juan's focus on financial security intensifies. He moves more money offshore, building a cushion that could sustain him if he ever needs to disappear. He invests heavily in properties outside Mexico, including a luxury estate in Costa Rica. Miguel notices the change and finally asks, "Are you planning for something?" Juan doesn't answer directly. "I'm planning for everything," he says. This subtle preparation does not go unnoticed. Some lieutenants interpret it as a sign that Juan is considering running, and rumors begin to circulate. The whispers feed the very instability Juan is trying to avoid, and then, in early January 1996, Juan receives devastating news. A close ally within the Mexican Federal Police has been quietly arrested and is now in U.S. custody. Worse, there are reports that the man is cooperating with American agents. If true, the DEA now has someone who can map out significant portions of the Gulf Cartel's infrastructure. Miguel delivers the news late at night, his voice low. "They're getting closer," he says. Juan nods. He's already thinking several steps ahead. "Then we make it harder," he replies. Over the next weeks, Juan escalates his security measures even further. He stops using any of the safe houses that law enforcement might know about. His movements become unpredictable, his circle of trusted associates smaller than ever. But as he sits in a darkened safe house in Reynosa, staring at a map of the border, Juan knows the truth. He is running out of moves. He closes his eyes for a moment, remembering his own words from months earlier. The higher the water rises, the more pressure there is behind the dam. The pressure is now unbearable, and the cracks are spreading faster than he can seal them. January 1996 is cold by Tamaulipas standards, the kind of cold that cuts through even the thick desert air at night. Juan García Ábrego, who once seemed untouchable, is now moving like a man navigating a minefield. He sleeps in different safe houses every few nights, traveling by convoy through back roads that avoid checkpoints. His movements are deliberate, unpredictable. He has learned not to linger anywhere, not to trust anyone fully, not even those he's trusted for years. The DEA task force is closer than ever, and Juan can feel it. Every phone call, every delivery, every new face in the organization carries the weight of potential betrayal. He sits in a dimly lit ranch house outside Reynosa, going over the latest reports with Miguel. "The Americans are tightening the screws," Miguel says, his voice a low murmur. "Our people are getting nervous. Some are talking about leaving." Juan doesn't flinch. "Leaving isn't an option," he says calmly. "We're all tied to this, whether they like it or not." But he knows Miguel is right. The pressure is splintering the Gulf Cartel from the inside. Some lieutenants are panicking, while others see opportunity in Juan's perceived vulnerability. For the first time, Juan senses that his aura of invincibility is cracking, and cracks like these spread fast in the world he inhabits. He decides to call a small private meeting with his most loyal lieutenants. They gather in a secluded warehouse near Matamoros, a place Juan once used as a staging ground for large shipments. The mood is tense, every man acutely aware of the risks they face. "We've survived worse," Juan begins, his voice steady but not forceful. But survival isn't about luck. It's about being smarter than the people chasing us. That's how we got here, and that's how we stay here. He lays out a plan. Smaller shipments, tighter security, and more redundancies in the network. If one route fails, others will absorb the load. He also reassures them that his political connections are still strong, though privately he knows that those relationships are fraying. U.S. pressure has made his allies in Mexico less reliable. Some are even distancing themselves to protect their own careers. After the meeting, Miguel pulls him aside. "You're trying to hold back the ocean," he says quietly. Juan gives a faint smile. "Then we build stronger walls." But as days turn into weeks, the walls feel more fragile. Law enforcement raids intensify on both sides of the border, and several mid-level operatives are arrested. One of them, a man Juan has known for years, begins cooperating with authorities in exchange for a lighter sentence. The DEA now has an informant who can pinpoint Juan's safe houses, his routes, and his lieutenants. Many people still think that arrests like Juan's were sudden, like lightning strikes. So what do you think? Was it sudden, or was this slow erosion, the endless leaks, betrayals, and mounting pressure that set the stage for the inevitable? By late January, Juan's options are dwindling. He considers fleeing Mexico altogether, perhaps to Costa Rica or Colombia, where his allies could shelter him. But he also knows that running could trigger chaos within the Gulf Cartel, leaving it vulnerable to rivals and law enforcement alike. One night, as he sits in a Reynosa safe house, Miguel brings in a report that chills Juan to his core. Mexican federal authorities, working with the DEA, have pinpointed his movements. They are preparing an operation to capture him. Juan exhales slowly, leaning back in his chair. "So it's here," he says. Miguel watches him closely. "We can move you tonight," he says. "You still have time." Juan shakes his head. "Running only makes us easier to find. We hold our ground, but from now on, every move is silent, every step calculated." He knows the storm is closing in, but he refuses to let fear dictate his actions. He has built his empire on discipline and calm under pressure, and he intends to face the coming days the same way, still. As the wind howls outside the safe house that night, Juan can't help but feel the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. The days following that cold January night in Reynosa feel strangely suspended, as if time itself has slowed to a crawl. Juan García Ábrego moves through his routines with practiced calm, but his mind is running at full speed. Every door he passes through, every car he steps into, is weighed with a new awareness of risk. Miguel is never far from his side, and the two speak in low, measured voices. "We have to assume they know our patterns now," Miguel says as they drive down a desolate road, headlights cutting through the early morning fog. "If they catch us in the open, they won't," Juan interrupts, not unkindly, but with a finality that signals the conversation is over. Behind the scenes, Juan is making subtle changes to the organization. Safe houses are being stripped of sensitive materials, cash reserves are divided into smaller caches and scattered across the region, and the most loyal lieutenants are ordered to disappear for a while. He knows that if the authorities find even one weak link, the entire chain could collapse. Many people still think that arrests of cartel leaders happen like thunderclaps, loud, shocking, instantaneous. So what do you think? Isn't it more likely that, like Juan, they sensed the storm building long before the first strike? One morning, as Juan drinks coffee in the kitchen of a new safe house near Matamoros, Miguel enters with fresh intelligence. Our source in Mexico City says they've set the trap, he reports. They've been tracking your movements for weeks. They want to make the capture clean, something they can parade in front of cameras. Juan sets down his cup and leans back in his chair, expression unreadable. So they want a trophy, he murmurs. Miguel nods. We could get you out. Costa Rica, Colombia, wherever you want. We still have the planes. But Juan shakes his head slowly. Running confirms their narrative. It makes us look weak, and it fractures everything we've built. If we go down on our own terms. That night, Juan holds one final meeting with a handful of trusted lieutenants. They gather in a small warehouse on the outskirts of Reynosa, the same warehouse where countless shipments have been staged over the years. The men sit around a battered table, the air thick with cigarette smoke. We're not finished, Juan tells them calmly, but we have to be smarter than we've ever been. No unnecessary risks, no mistakes. We focus on survival until the tide turns. The lieutenants nod, but Juan can see the fear in their eyes. The DEA and Mexican authorities are closing in, and everyone knows it. The myth of his untouchability, once so powerful, is now showing cracks. After the meeting, Miguel approaches Juan privately. They'll come for you soon, he says. We need to be ready for that moment. Juan glances at him, his expression calm but distant. I've been ready for it since the first day we crossed the river with those calves, he says softly. Everything after that has just been time borrowed. The next day, Juan moves once again, this time to a safe house deep in the countryside. He spends the evening in quiet reflection, looking out over the flat expanse of Tamaulipas. The sky is a tapestry of stars, as it was when he was a boy dreaming of something bigger than the dusty ranch he was born on. He doesn't know the exact hour when the storm will break, but he can feel the pressure building. And when it does, Juan vows he will meet it with the same steady composure that has carried him this far. Because even as the walls close in, he refuses to believe he is beaten. The safe house deep in the Tamaulipas countryside is quiet, but Juan García Ábrego knows better than to confuse quiet with safety. He rises early each morning, walking the perimeter with Miguel and a pair of armed guards. They scan the fields, listening for anything out of place, the crunch of tires on gravel, the distant hum of helicopters. So far, nothing. But Juan knows the silence won't last. Inside the house, the mood is tense. The handful of lieutenants who remain at his side move with the nervous energy of men who know they are being hunted. Every knock at the door makes them reach for their weapons, and every flicker of headlights on the distant road draws them to the windows. One evening, as they sit in the dimly lit living room, Miguel speaks what everyone is thinking. Your shields are cracking, he says quietly. The politicians, the federales, they're not protecting us like they used to. The Americans have made it too costly for them. Juan nods, his face unreadable. They're choosing the side they think will win, he says. That's human nature. He knows Miguel is right. The political protection that once seemed impenetrable is evaporating. Men who once answered his calls are now avoiding him, unwilling to risk their own futures for his sake. Bribes that used to guarantee silence now buy only a momentary pause before information finds its way to the DEA. Many people still think that powerful men like Juan fell because they got reckless. So what do you think? Was it recklessness? Or was it the slow erosion of every protection he had built? The next morning, Miguel delivers fresh intelligence. Mexican federal authorities, working closely with the DEA, have finalized a plan to capture Juan. They're waiting for the right moment, Miguel says. If we don't move now, they'll come to us. Juan stares out the window for a long moment, watching a hawk circle lazily in the pale blue sky. If we run, we lose everything, he says. But if we stay, we face the storm head on. Miguel presses him. We could get you out of the country tonight. The planes are ready. Costa Rica, Colombia, wherever you want. Juan turns to him, his voice calm but firm. And then what? We spend the rest of our lives running, never knowing which door they'll knock on next? No, that's not the life I built. Still, Juan makes preparations. He divides the remaining cash into smaller bundles, sending couriers to stash them in locations known only to a trusted few. He burns documents that could compromise others if they are found, and he orders the relocation of key lieutenants to safer ground. As night falls, Juan walks the grounds one last time. The fields are silent except for the rustle of wind through the grass. He remembers the early days, nights like this when he would cross the Rio Grande with Humberto. Nothing but a horse and a rope, the stakes measured in a handful of stolen calves. Those days seem impossibly distant now. Miguel joins him outside, hands shoved into his coat pockets. We're going to be ready, right? He asks. Juan glances at him, his expression as steady as ever. We've been ready since the day we started this, he says. He doesn't say it out loud, but he knows the truth. Readiness may not be enough this time. And somewhere out there, in the darkness beyond the safe house, the storm is already moving closer. The night in Reynosa is unusually still, as if the air itself is waiting. Inside the small safe house, Juan García Ábrego reviews the last of his preparations by the dim glow of a single lamp. His lieutenants are scattered throughout the property, stationed at windows and doorways, scanning the fields beyond the wire fence. They are loyal, but their nerves are frayed. Every rustle of the wind, every distant car engine makes them tense. Miguel sits across from Juan, hands clasped together, his expression hard to read. They're coming, he says quietly, though there's no new intelligence. It's just a fact, one they can all feel now. Juan nods slowly. Yes, the question is when. He stands and walks the length of the room, pausing by the window. From here, he can see the countryside stretching endlessly into the night. It's the same horizon he grew up with, the same flat fields and low brush that once felt like a sanctuary. Now, it feels like a cage. The following day is uneventful, almost suspiciously so. The guards take turns sleeping in shifts, Miguel never leaving Juan's side. The sun dips low, casting long shadows across the yard, and then the house is once again shrouded in darkness. Juan eats dinner in silence, his mind distant, and then it happens. Shortly after midnight, a faint rumble builds in the distance. At first, it sounds like a passing storm, but Juan and Miguel know better. Trucks, multiple engines. Headlights suddenly pierce the night as a convoy of vehicles barrels down the dirt road toward the safe house. Positions! Miguel shouts, and the lieutenants scramble. The guards at the gate barely have time to react before Mexican federal forces breach the perimeter. Shouts echo through the night. Orders barked in Spanish as men in black uniforms swarm the compound. Juan stays calm, even as the chaos erupts around him. He's seen raids before, but this one is different. The precision, the coordination. It's clear that the DEA has orchestrated every detail. He doesn't bother reaching for a weapon. He knows how this will end if he fights. Miguel bursts into the room, gun in hand. We have to go, he urges, but Juan shakes his head. There's nowhere to go, Juan says quietly. If we run, they'll kill us. If we stay, maybe they won't. The front door splinters under the weight of a battering ram. Flashlights sweep the room as armed officers flood in. Juan raises his hands slowly, making no sudden movements. Miguel hesitates, but Juan gives him a look that says everything. It's over. He is pushed to the ground, handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists as flashbulbs from the officers' cameras light up the room. Somewhere outside, a helicopter hovers low, the downdraft whipping up dust and debris. Many people still think that these arrests are dramatic finales. But what do you think? Was this really the end, or just the beginning of a different kind of battle for Juan? As he's led outside into the blinding glare of spotlights, Juan keeps his head high. He refuses to give the cameras the image they want. A broken man. In the back of the armored truck, he glances at Miguel, who is seated beside him, equally restrained. We knew this day would come, Juan says softly, almost to himself. Miguel nods. What now? Juan doesn't answer immediately. He stares out the window at the countryside slipping away, the land that shaped him. Finally, he says, now we see who still owes us favors. Because even in chains, Juan García Ábrego understands that power doesn't disappear overnight. The transport from Reynosa to Mexico City is heavily guarded. Convoys of armored trucks and military vehicles roll down the highway, sirens wailing, as if to announce to the world that the elusive Juan García Ábrego has finally been caught. Journalists swarm along the roadsides, cameras flashing whenever the convoy slows. Juan sits in the back of a truck, wrists bound, his face calm and unreadable despite the chaos surrounding him. Miguel is beside him, equally silent. Neither man speaks until they reach the military base outside Mexico City, where Juan will be held until his next move becomes clear. When the doors swing open, Juan steps out first, scanning the scene. Federal police, soldiers, DEA agents, they're all here. A small army converging to secure the man who once made entire governments look away. One of the DEA agents steps forward, speaking through a translator. Mr. García Ábrego, you're under arrest on charges of drug trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy. Juan nods slightly, offering no resistance. He's been expecting this moment for years. He knows that fighting now would only accelerate his fall. Inside the facility, the atmosphere is colder, more clinical. He is fingerprinted, photographed, and processed with mechanical efficiency. The agents avoid unnecessary conversation, though Juan notices that some of them can't help stealing glances at him. He is, after all, the man they have been chasing for over a decade. Many people still think that arrests like this are clean breaks. But what do you think? Isn't it more likely that the power and influence Juan wielded for so long will continue to echo even after his capture? Late that night, a Mexican federal official visits Juan in his holding cell. You know they want to extradite you, the man says quietly. The Americans are pushing hard. Juan leans back against the cold concrete wall, his hands resting loosely in his lap. Do I have a choice? He asks. The official hesitates. If the right people intervened, perhaps. But they're afraid. The Americans have made it clear. If you stay here, they'll cut off cooperation. And no one wants that. Juan gives a faint smile. So my friends are no longer my friends. The next morning, he is informed that Mexico has approved his extradition. Juan's composure doesn't crack, but inside he feels the weight of the decision. He has built his empire on the assumption that political connections would shield him, and now those shields are gone. As he is led out of the facility in handcuffs, Miguel walks just behind him. This is it, Miguel whispers. Juan glances over his shoulder. His expression is steady as ever. Nothing is ever it, he replies, The handoff to U.S. Marshals is swift and clinical. Juan is placed on a secure flight to Houston, surrounded by armed guards. The agents are careful, aware that their prisoner has resources and allies capable of extraordinary things. On the flight, Juan sits silently, gazing out the small window. Below, the familiar landscape of northern Mexico slips away. The fields and rivers he once controlled, now just a memory. When they land in Texas, reporters are waiting at the tarmac, cameras flashing as Juan is escorted down the steps of the plane. He keeps his head high, refusing to let them see any trace of fear or regret. Inside the courthouse in Houston, the formalities begin. Federal prosecutors outline the charges: conspiracy, smuggling, laundering, bribery, and a long list of other crimes. Juan listens calmly, his expression giving nothing away. That night, in his cell at a federal detention center, Juan finally has a moment alone. He sits on the edge of the narrow bed, the sounds of the facility humming around him. He knows his trial will be long and public, that his name will be splashed across headlines for months to come. But he also knows this: the Gulf Cartel will not simply disappear because he is behind bars, and that thought brings him a measure of quiet satisfaction. The courtroom in Houston is a world away from the safe houses and dusty roads of Tamaulipas. The sterile walls and polished wood radiate an air of formality that Juan García Ábrego has no interest in. He sits in a crisp suit provided by his court-appointed legal team, his hands folded on the defense table, his gaze steady. He knows the cameras are capturing every angle of his face, broadcasting him as the banker of the Gulf, the man who ran one of the most powerful drug cartels in the world. Federal prosecutors paint him as a criminal mastermind who moved billions in narcotics and laundered just as much through banks on both sides of the border. They present charts, seized ledgers, and testimonies from former associates who now sit under the protective glow of government deals. Juan listens silently, betraying no emotion, even when the evidence is particularly damning. Miguel is not by his side. Arrested during the Reynosa raid, he has chosen to cooperate with prosecutors, trading testimony for a reduced sentence. Juan expected as much. Loyalty is rare in his world when facing decades behind bars. Many people still think that courtroom dramas are won with grand speeches. So what do you think? Isn't it more likely that Juan knows the outcome has already been decided, long before the jury steps into the room? His defense attorneys do what they can, challenging the credibility of witnesses and questioning the legality of the extradition. But the prosecution's case is overwhelming. One by one, former lieutenants and corrupt officials take the stand, outlining the intricate web Juan built to smuggle narcotics and launder money. Some speak in hushed voices, others with a rehearsed boldness, but all of them point their fingers at Juan. The jury deliberates for just 2 days before returning with guilty verdicts on multiple counts: drug trafficking, money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy. The judge, a stern figure who barely looks at Juan as he reads the sentence, hands down life without parole. Juan remains expressionless, his eyes fixed forward as the courtroom erupts with flashes from reporters' cameras. It is the first time in decades that he no longer has control over his own future. But even in defeat, Juan's mind turns to the organization he left behind. The Gulf Cartel is now leaderless, and power vacuums in this world are dangerous. He knows rival factions will seize the opportunity to fight for control, each one claiming his legacy. In his cell that night, Juan reflects on the irony. The system that chased him for years now promises to keep him alive indefinitely. In some ways, it's a safer fate than the one that would have awaited him on the outside, where betrayal and bullets are never far away. He leans back on the narrow prison bed, listening to the muffled sounds of the detention center. He can almost picture Tamaulipas, the flat fields stretching to the horizon, the smell of mesquite on the wind. For the first time in years, he allows himself to think about the boy he once was, the boy who crossed the Rio Grande with Humberto and a rope of calves, dreaming of a life bigger than the dusty ranch. The dreams came true, he realizes, and now he will live with their price. The years following Juan García Ábrego's sentencing settle into a rhythm that is both suffocating and strangely predictable. The walls of the federal penitentiary in Beaumont, Texas, are stark and unyielding, but they are also familiar. For a man who once lived in constant motion, rarely staying in one place long enough to leave a footprint, the monotony of prison life is its own kind of torment. Juan adapts quickly. He knows that in an environment like this, survival depends on patience and restraint. He keeps to himself, avoiding the gangs and cliques that dominate the prison's social hierarchy. Though many inmates recognize his name, Juan makes it clear that he is not there to build alliances. He spends his days reading newspapers, keeping up with the world beyond the walls, and quietly observing the routines of those around him. Occasionally, a guard or fellow inmate will ask about the Gulf Cartel, about the billions of dollars and the power he once wielded. Juan never answers directly. That was another life, he says, and then he turns back to whatever he was doing. But he is not blind to what's happening beyond the bars. He knows the Gulf Cartel is fracturing in his absence. Rival factions, emboldened by his imprisonment, are battling for control. Some lieutenants have splintered off entirely, forming their own groups. The violence spilling across Tamaulipas makes headlines even in American newspapers, and Juan can't help but notice how often those stories begin with the phrase, "Since the arrest of Juan García Ábrego, many people still think that prison erases a man's influence." So what do you think? Isn't it possible that Juan's shadow still lingers over the cartel, shaping decisions even from behind bars? He receives occasional letters from loyalists on the outside, though he never writes back. He knows that any communication could be intercepted, twisted into evidence of ongoing criminal activity. Instead, he reads the letters quietly, storing the information away. One letter in particular catches his attention. It's from a young man who claims to be the son of one of Juan's former lieutenants. The letter is polite, almost deferential. "We are trying to keep the roots alive," it reads. "But it's not the same without your guidance." Juan folds the letter carefully and places it in a worn envelope with the others. He doesn't reply, but he can't help but feel a pang of something he rarely allowed himself in the past. Nostalgia. He spends his evenings walking slow laps around the prison yard, the Texas sun dipping below the horizon as guards watch from the towers above. Sometimes, he imagines he's back in Tamaulipas, riding a horse along the Rio Grande, the air thick with the smell of earth and cattle. Other times, he simply focuses on the rhythm of his steps, using it as a way to clear his mind. Juan understands that his life has entered its final chapter, but unlike many of the men around him, he does not dwell on regrets. He made choices, and those choices built an empire that once shaped nations. As he lies on his narrow bed one night, Juan thinks about something he told Miguel years ago. The higher the water rises, the more pressure there is behind the dam. He knows now that the dam always breaks eventually, but he also knows that for a time he controlled the flood, and in the quiet of his cell, That knowledge is enough. Juan García Ábrego has been behind bars for years now, but his name still carries weight far beyond the walls of the federal penitentiary. Journalists continue to write articles about him. Criminologists cite him as a case study in cartel economics, and law enforcement agencies use his empire as a blueprint for understanding how criminal networks operate. In Mexico, however, the Gulf Cartel has become a shadow of what it was under Juan's leadership. Rival factions are locked in violent turf wars, each one claiming legitimacy as his successor. These bloody conflicts dominate headlines, with stories of ambushes, kidnappings, and entire towns terrorized by the competing groups. Juan reads these accounts in the newspaper each morning, sitting quietly at a steel table in the prison commons. "Since your arrest, everything's changed," a fellow inmate says one afternoon as they wait in line for lunch. "The Gulf Cartel's falling apart. You kept them together." Juan doesn't respond. He knows the man is right, but he also knows the truth is more complicated. Organizations like the Gulf Cartel are built to survive leadership changes, yet his own rise and fall disrupted the natural order in a way few anticipated. He wasn't just a boss, he was the banker, the strategist, the man who understood that money was more powerful than bullets. Many people still think that drug cartels survive purely through violence. So what do you think? Wasn't Juan's success proof that influence and economics could shape an empire even more effectively than fear? Inside the prison, Juan maintains his measured routine. He spends hours in the library, reading history books and financial journals. He exercises alone in the yard, ignoring the chaotic undercurrent of prison politics. Guards notice that he never asks for special treatment, never causes trouble, but the world outside continues to pull at him in subtle ways. Letters from old associates still arrive, though fewer than before. Some ask for advice, others offer news of the cartel's latest internal struggles. Juan reads them all carefully, burning each one in the small metal trash can in his cell when he's finished. One letter stands out. It comes from a young woman who claims to be related to one of Juan's distant cousins. She writes not about the cartel, but about the towns of Tamaulipas, about how the violence has displaced families and shuttered schools. "People still talk about you," she writes. "Some say things were safer when you were in charge." The words linger with Juan longer than he expects. He never saw himself as a savior, but he understands the paradox. His control, his obsession with order, may have kept certain regions stable. Without him, chaos has filled the vacuum. Late at night, lying awake on his narrow bed, Juan reflects on the legacy he's left behind. He doesn't romanticize it. He knows the pain his empire caused. But he also can't deny that he shaped the Gulf Cartel into something larger than a criminal syndicate. It became a financial machine that touched governments, banks, and entire economies. And now that machine has no driver. As Juan closes his eyes, he imagines the flat plains of Tamaulipas once more. He can almost feel the dry wind on his face, smell the faint scent of mesquite carried from the riverbanks. It's been years since he set foot there, but in his mind, it's as vivid as the day he left. Juan García Ábrego's name is now as much a myth as it is a memory. From the confines of his prison cell, he hears whispers from fellow inmates about how people in Mexico still speak of him. The man who kept the Gulf Cartel functioning like a clock. The banker who made billions vanish into thin air. Some call him a ghost who once ruled without leaving a trace. Others describe him as a man who understood power better than anyone else. But Juan doesn't dwell on myth. He lives in the day-to-day, a rhythm as consistent as the ticking of a clock. Breakfast at 6 a.m., exercise in the yard, afternoons spent reading or working small jobs assigned by the prison. He avoids trouble, knowing that discipline is his best armor. Even in prison, Juan understands that control is everything. He knows the Gulf Cartel is no longer the organization he built. Newspapers describe it as fractured, plagued by infighting and increasingly violent under new leadership. Rival cartels, once kept at bay by the cartel's steady flow of money and influence, have begun to encroach on territories once considered untouchable. Juan reads about these battles with the same detached calm he once brought to boardroom-style meetings in safe houses. Many people still think that drug cartels thrive on chaos. But what do you think? Wasn't Juan's quiet precision the very thing that kept the Gulf Cartel stable for so long? Letters still arrive from time to time. One from an old associate in Matamoros details how new bosses are demanding loyalty through violence rather than trust. Another, from a distant relative, thanks Juan for once paying for the local church roof, a kindness long remembered by a struggling community. Juan folds each letter neatly, placing them in a small stack he keeps in the corner of his cell. One afternoon, a prison guard stops by Juan's cell and lingers a moment longer than usual. "You know," the guard says, "I was stationed in Brownsville years ago. People there still talk about how you could make things happen, how you controlled both sides of the border without anyone seeing you." Juan gives a faint smile, but says nothing. He has long since stopped explaining himself. As the years pass, Juan begins to think more about the larger picture. He wonders whether his legacy will be remembered as one of power or destruction, or both. He knows the Gulf Cartel became a model for others, showing that drug trafficking could be run like a business rather than a series of impulsive gambles. But he also knows the cost, the violence, the fear, the instability that followed. Late at night, he lies awake on his narrow bed and recalls the early days. He can still see the dusty trails of Tamaulipas, the horse rides with Humberto, the feeling of freedom as they crossed the Rio Grande with their first illicit cargo. Back then, the risks were small and the rewards immediate. Now, the stakes are global, and the empire he built exists only in headlines and whispered stories. Yet Juan doesn't indulge in regret. He knows regret is a luxury he cannot afford. He closes his eyes and reminds himself of a truth he learned long ago. Power isn't about being remembered. It's about shaping what comes next. And whether he likes it or not, the shadow he cast over Mexico's underworld will linger long after he's gone. Time in prison moves differently. Days bleed into each other until they no longer feel distinct, and for Juan García Ábrego, the monotony is almost soothing. He has always valued structure, and the rigid schedule of the federal penitentiary provides it in abundance. Wake, eat, exercise, read, sleep, over and over, until the passage of years becomes a blur. But even as his world shrinks to the size of a concrete cell, Juan's name refuses to fade. Criminology professors lecture about him at universities, calling him a case study in cartel logistics and financial engineering. Documentaries air on television, dramatizing his rise and fall with actors and ominous voiceovers. Some even embellish the facts, turning Juan into a near mythical figure who moved cocaine across borders with the precision of a chess grandmaster. Juan watches none of these programs. He isn't interested in his mythology, but he does hear about them from guards, who sometimes stop by his cell to comment. "They say you built the Gulf Cartel like a corporation," one remarks. Juan doesn't correct him. He only replies, "Corporations answer to shareholders. I never had to." Meanwhile, The world outside continues to shift. The Gulf Cartel has fractured beyond recognition, splintered into smaller, more volatile groups. These factions are less disciplined and more violent, leaving a trail of bloodshed across Tamaulipas and Nuevo León. Rival organizations, sensing weakness, seize territory, sparking battles that devastate communities. Many people still think that the cartel's decline is a sign of justice prevailing. So what do you think? Or is it possible that the vacuum left by Juan's imprisonment only unleashed greater chaos? Juan reads the reports with quiet resignation. He knows the organization he built was always going to change without him, but he can't help noticing how quickly its structure has unraveled. The careful systems he designed, the financial channels, the distribution pipelines, the layers of political protection, have been replaced by brute force and short-sighted decisions. One letter he receives from an old associate confirms his suspicions. "It's not the same," the man writes. "Everyone wants to be the boss now, but no one knows how to keep the money clean. The violence is worse than ever." Juan folds the letter and sets it aside. He has no advice to offer. He understands better than anyone that stability in their world is fleeting. At night, he lies awake on the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the prison. Footsteps in the hallway, the metallic clang of doors, the distant hum of generators. He thinks of Tamaulipas often, the dry wind, the open sky, the sense of possibility he felt as a young man when the world seemed wide open. He also thinks about the choices he made, not with regret, but with clarity. He knew the rules of the game from the start, and he played them better than most. He built something that changed the landscape of organized crime, and for years he stayed a step ahead of everyone chasing him. But Juan knows the truth now. No one stays ahead forever, and in the stillness of his cell, he accepts that as the final lesson of a life lived on the edge. Juan García Ábrego wakes up to the same sounds he has heard for years: the distant clatter of doors unlocking, the murmur of guards starting their rounds, and the low hum of the prison waking from its slumber. It's a rhythm he's come to know intimately, one that marks the passage of time with mechanical precision. For a man who once lived with the constant unpredictability of the cartel world, there's an odd comfort in the monotony. But comfort doesn't erase the weight of reflection. Each day, as Juan walks the yard or sits quietly in the library, he contemplates the empire he built and the legacy it left behind. News of the Gulf Cartel's ongoing fragmentation still filters into the prison. He reads about violent clashes between factions, about younger leaders who see brutality as the only tool at their disposal, and about entire communities living in fear. Many people still think that prison neutralizes men like Juan completely. So what do you think? Is it really that simple, or does the influence of a man like him ripple long after his capture? Letters from old associates and distant family members continue to arrive sporadically. Some reminisce about the days when the cartel was more orderly, when Juan's quiet discipline kept the violence contained. Others share updates about life in Tamaulipas, how schools struggle to stay open, how businesses are shuttering, how families are uprooted by the chaos. Juan reads these letters slowly, deliberately. When he finishes, he places them in a neat stack on the shelf beside his bed. He doesn't respond. He knows there is little he can offer from behind bars. At night, as the prison grows silent, Juan allows himself to think about the boy he once was, the boy who crossed the Rio Grande with Humberto and a rope of calves, believing that the world was his for the taking. He remembers the dusty roads, the creaking mesquite trees, the quiet determination that propelled him forward. Now, decades later, he understands the paradox of his life. The very discipline and foresight that built his empire also made it too big to survive him. He knows that the systems he created, the networks of money, protection, and influence, are being dismantled piece by piece. But he also knows that their echoes will linger for years to come. And in that thought, there is a measure of peace, because Juan García Ábrego has learned the ultimate truth of power. It doesn't always vanish when the man holding it is gone. It leaves shadows, lessons, and scars that shape the world long after the gates have closed. Now that we've reached the end of Juan García Ábrego's story, let's take a moment to slow down together. Imagine the quiet that follows after a storm has passed. The air is cool, the wind is soft, and everything around you feels still for the first time in a long while. You are sitting outside in the warm glow of the early evening, the sun dipping low on the horizon. There's no rush, no noise, just the sound of your own breath as you settle deeper into your chair. You might even hear the faint rustle of leaves as a breeze drifts by, carrying the scent of earth and grass. If you've been holding on to any tension, now is the time to let it go. Feel your shoulders relax, your jaw unclench, your hands rest gently in your lap. The day is done, and there is nothing left you need to do except be here, in this quiet space you've made for yourself. The lessons from Juan's story about ambition, control, and the fleeting nature of power can rest too. You don't have to hold on to them tonight. Instead, allow your thoughts to soften, to drift like clouds passing slowly overhead. The stars are beginning to appear now, one by one, and the sky is vast and comforting. Take one last deep breath, filling your lungs completely before exhaling slowly. This is your time, your space, your peace, and when you're ready, you can close your eyes, knowing that the night will carry you gently into the rest you deserve.